Boys and girls, if you weren't well aware, Warhammer 40k and the company that owns it, Games Workshop, has been a lot of hot water the last couple of weeks. There's been a lot of fan outrage, a lot of backlash because of a retcon that they did, adding female Custodes into a codex without any kind of explanation. And when fans questioned this, they decided to dismiss them and talk down to them and say, well, it's always been there. I don't know why you're complaining about it, yada, yada, yada. It's typical kind of modern speak that we see time and time again with a lot of this kind of woke indoctrination, a lot of this cult stuff taking over a lot of our favorite franchises out there. Now, I'm a fan of Warhammer 40k. There was a time that I even made Warhammer lore videos for another channel out there. And ladies and gentlemen, I've spent more money than I'd like to admit, probably on plastic crack and a lot of their lore, a lot of the lore books and all of that kind of stuff, delving deep. Now, I haven't been around Warhammer for the longest time. It's only really been the last couple of years that I've really found a major interest. It's something that I always heard about. It's always something that sounded fascinating, but it just seemed over-encompassing to do it. And, well, just like many of you out there, once Henry Cavill announced that he was going to be running the show and actually making good quality television content that's actually respectful of the lore, and said, you know what? It's a big, expansive universe. Let's go ahead and give it a shot, because I trusted Henry Cavill. But boys and girls, it turns out we couldn't trust Games Workshop in any way, shape, or form to stick to their own lore. And there are many people out there pushing back. And in response to a recent GamesRadar article from Abigail Shannon and her first Warhammer experience, just going, oh, it's so bad. They were so mean to me. Oh, it was so misogynistic. Da, 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 da. Well, one female gamer is coming out there and pushing back on this, because not only has she been a gamer since before the majority of these writers that are crying and screaming and whining about this were even born, but she's also a Warhammer 40k fan and has her own experiences to talk about, and is absolutely roasting and dismissing all of this crazy nonsense that Abigail is trying to push back against this. And honestly, ladies and gentlemen, I'm all here for it. So let's check out a response to GamesRadar's Abigail Shannon and her first Warhammer experience. This female gamer is a male ally by Jessica Clapp, and shout out to Jessica out there for coming out there and standing up and defending her favorite hobbies against this kind of insane tyranny, and giving, of course, the credence and a little bit more clout because of the fact that, guess what, boys and girls, she's got something different between her legs than a lot of us out there do. All right, so let's check this out. So Jessica states out here, I've been a gamer since 1991. My parents bought my brother and me a Super Nintendo for Christmas. In other words, I've been a gamer for longer than many of these so-called game journalists today have been alive. I'm a woman, and I have never really liked my peers. Girls can be catty, mean, backstabbing, and socially cruel. I think we've all seen that. So naturally, one of my closest friends growing up were boys. We played Super Nintendo at my house and Sega or PS1 at their house. We played street hockey on rollerblades and built tree forts in the woods. I didn't demand my friends play with Barbies. I appreciated the opportunity to play their games by their rules. You mean something like what we would consider a tomboy nowadays? Oh, you know, something that they try to do bad things to and make them believe that they're actually something they're not? This is a fundamental principle that the current generation doesn't seem to understand. When you join someone in their world, going in with an agenda to change it is only going to win you enemies. Absolutely. And Games Workshop gladly welcomed these monsters into their fold and into their company, and now they're going to deal with the consequences of it. So when I read Abigail Shannon's article about her first encounter with a Games Workshop employee and her subsequent thoughts on the 40k fandom and men in general, my action was anger and disbelief. I grew up in the wild, wild west of the early internet, so maybe I've developed a thicker skin than most. The internet can be a toxic place, and sometimes, like in the real world, a jerk is just a jerk. But even so, I know better than to let one or two bad encounters shape my impressions of gamers or men as a whole. Considering the fact that she's married to a man nowadays, yeah, I think she probably actually is a little more grown up and mature than Abigail Schreier. Her article reads like a revenge narrative. I was wronged 10 years ago, so now I'm going to use my platform to tarnish something an employee is going to try to gatekeep. Did she ever stop to consider why people gatekeep? Did she ever consider that she might be the problem? Of course not. They're too narcissistic for that. The answer, of course, is no. She's a journalist, quote unquote, so we're all supposed to believe her one bad encounter represents the whole of the 40k community, and men in general. Ergo, women should join the efforts to infiltrate Warhammer and herald in equality and diversity. Excuse me while I go vomit. And as a guy who was very much a noob to the Warhammer universe, there was a lot of chats I went into, and guess what? Everybody was nothing but welcoming. Even when I was buying stuff, because I'm a Dark Angels fan, right? I like green, and I just kind of gravitated toward them, and it turns out they've got really cool lore, and they're an absolutely awesome faction, and I'm down for the line. I'm so excited that he's back, right? So, but I asked him, I was like in the chat, and I was asking other people that had played the game before. I says, I'm trying to build an army. I said, these are some of the, I'm trying to buy Dark Angel specific things. Are these particular Dark Angels models, are these useful and overall for an army and stuff like that? And they were giving me answers. They were nothing helpful. They were nothing but nice. Now, given I did go to a Games Workshop store And the guy was a little off-putting at the store a little bit, but he was still very nice, still answered all of my questions, still got me some cool stuff, and I want to go back and hang out at that store some more and watch them play games and do all of that kind of stuff. But it's also one of those things like they see a lot of people that are tourists, they see all that kind of stuff all the time, and they go, are your intentions honorable? Are your intentions are good? Or are you just somebody who's just coming around being a tourist? Or are you actually going to commit to the bit? And that's kind of the thing here, right here. And obviously this is not something they want to do. They want to get involved in this just so they can change it and make it as miserable and upset as they all are. I cannot keep quiet on this, Jessica continues. I would like to offer my experience as a female gamer with my first time ever walking into a classic tabletop nerd store as a counterpoint to Abigail's experience. I want to prove that there are women like me who understand the value of adapting oneself to belong to a group rather than demanding a group adapt to conform to you. And this has always been the problem. Nerds love nerding out about things. Geeks love geeking out. If you ask them about one of their favorite hobbies, 99 out of 100 times, they are going to give you more information than you ever possibly could have wanted or asked for. That's exactly what nerds do. We want to convert you into our fandom. We want to tell you how awesome it is. We want you to love it just as much as we do, so that way we have other people we can talk about, nerd out, and love over this stuff. That's what we want. But when you try to come in and change things, when you try to come in and tell us how our fandoms are supposed to be, about how our materials are supposed to be, that's when we have a problem with it. And that kind of gatekeeping should always stick around. I'm of the old school belief, Jessica carries on, that when you travel to a foreign country, you don't walk around demanding people speak your language. Exactly. Instead, you buy a phrase book and you stumble through trying to communicate with people in their language in their country. My first experience with tabletop Warhammer happened about 10 years ago, in 2013, in a small Midwestern town. My husband and I were new to the area and exploring the historic old town on our bikes. We both play Warhammer games on PC, Vermintide, Space Marine, Dawn of War. I can't wait for the new Space Marine game. Space Marine 2. So when we saw a Necron in the window of a shop, we parked our bikes and walked in to have a look around. I'd never heard of tabletop Warhammer, but my husband had, so we didn't need the clerk to come explain things to us. I leafed through the books and checked out the different armies, and as we were browsing, a group of men carrying giant tote bags and suitcases entered the store and went to the basement. The clerk told us that they were regulars who played on the tabletop downstairs. We were welcome to go check it out, so we did. The guys in the basement were your typical nerds, meaning nothing at all. One guy was huge, at least 6'4", with long hair, arms covered in tattoos, and wearing a Metallica shirt. There was a heavy-set guy wearing a Star Wars shirt. I remember because I commented on both shirts. There were a few athletic guys, a short guy who was the epitome of a D&D DM. Rude eye, what's up, Fed? And one very thin guy who was setting up a perfectly painted set of Space Wolves. D&D and Metallica were both excited to tell us about their hobby and walk us around the room to see all the armies and explain how they were setting up to fight. The athletic guys greeted us and went about their game. The guy with the wolves was wringing his hands and pacing in a corner. Sounds like he was worried about the game. I stupidly walked up to him and asked if I'd look at his army. He waved a hand at his set and mumbled something that I didn't quite catch. Metallica stepped in and handed me a few of intricately painted pieces to examine. I asked a few questions about how he accomplished such a high level of detail and was surprised that Metallica was answering for the thin guy. It was at that moment that I realized I was missing a subtle subtext. The thin guy was anxious. That was clear. But that's when it dawned on me that I was the only woman in the room. It didn't matter that I was married. He was clearly anxious about my attention and proximity. Whether it was because I was a woman or maybe something else. I'm not going to make too many wild assumptions. Maybe my deodorant had worn off. Either way, Metallica was showing a great deal of compassion by stepping between us and playing interface because I was too stupid to realize that I was making someone uncomfortable. Metallica was protecting his friend. Tell me how that's not an environment you wouldn't want to be a part of. Like literally the big beefy guy covered in tattoos with the Metallica shirt on is defending the skinny little nerd in the corner who doesn't know how to deal with a girl being around. Like, that's a beautiful thing. Why do these I know why they want to come in and destroy, because they're monsters and they're evil and they don't want us to have things like this. They're literally from the depths of hell. Okay? They're literally from the depths of hell. I think that's when my husband also realized something was afoot, because he took the figurines from me and asked the thin guy about the strategy he favored when playing against different opponents. I went with Metallica and D&D to another table, and they asked me what my favorite army was. So I sat down and got into the nitty-gritty about the Tau. Nobody liked my army, and I was quickly the butt of jokes about space communists. Yes, we love our Tau brethren, but we love our Tau players. But yes, you're space commies. Okay, they're just all you are. That is exactly what it is. You're space commies. And the other guys put a thin guy at ease, and I watched as he relaxed and set up his army, excitedly explaining the details of his playstyle to my husband. That basement was his space, and he deserved to feel comfortable in it. That doesn't mean that I wasn't welcome there. I was, but I had to give him time, not the other way around. I was the tourist, the foreigner, the unknown entity in that first foray. Thankfully, I've spent enough time around guys and gamers that I didn't make a total ass of myself. I like to believe that anyway. I didn't waltz into the basement and demand attention or ask where all the women were. I didn't get offended by nobody was playing Sisters of Battle. I appreciate the wealth of knowledge and the fact that they were very friendly guys who were willing to explain the game to an interested listener. I ended up buying a Tau Army, paints, and a codex, and we went back to the shop several times after that. We were always greeted, welcome, and encouraged to learn about the ins and outs of tabletop gaming. I'm not an influential person. I'm not a journalist or a YouTuber. I'm not on Facebook, Instagram, or X. I'm not an investor. Heck, I'm not even really a tabletop gamer. But I am a wife, a mother, and a sister. The men in my life have spaces and hobbies that are important to them, and I would rather fight shoulder to shoulder with them to protect their spaces than be a part of the ideological horde that is not only invading their space, but demanding that they conform to its foreign languages and customs. This is wrong, and I want all my male gamer friends to know that this space communist stands with you. Groot and Tau stand as one. Here, 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 here. I love this lady. I know absolutely nothing more about her than this article that she wrote. Like she said, she's not on any of the social media. She's just somebody who decided to reach out to Gap Park Place and went, I am not going to stand for this. I am going to tell everybody, and I'm going to put a counterpoint out there on one of the biggest in our fellowship websites out there. I'm going to push back against this nonsense. I am not going to put up with it. I am not going to let this stand. And that's what we need more of. We need more people like her coming out here and voicing their opinions and pushing back against this narrative, pushing back against this nonsense. Maybe if Games Workshop had an army of people just like her all over their X account, roasting them left and right for this kind of nonsense, maybe this kind of stuff wouldn't happen. That's what's happening. More and more people are waking up with the BS. Games Workshop is just the latest in a long laundry list of companies that have been infested by this ideology, that have been infested by this mind virus, that have been possessed by the spirit of the age and taken over by acolytes of the cult. And until we purge that infection, until we purge that heresy and eradicate these Xeno scum the way they deserve to be in the name of the Emperor, in the name of every fan of Warhammer 40k out there, the destruction will continue. Because we have seen this story happen time and time again. It's no different than what happened to Marvel. It's no different than what happened to DC. It's no different than what happened to Pixar. It's no different than what happened to what the Walt Disney Company. And it's no different than what we've seen happening in the game industry. This goes one way and one way only. The time and true tested saying of go woke, go broke happens. At least fortunately enough for all of us fans out there, we'll always have our codexes, we'll always have the PDFs, and we'll always have 3D printers. And go ahead, Games Workshop, keep doing it because 3D printers are just going to go brrr, and you're going to end up the way of the dodo.